Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is Kiddushin daf Kaf Hey. We're in the middle of a series of brises that relate to slaves going free due to the loss of a tooth or an eye. And as we pick up with the on the fourth medium width line on daf Kaf Dalet Amabet. So if you go down from the Im Lav, that's the first, down to the line that begins Delo Samim Legamri, that you don't become blind completely, you'll see in the middle of the line it says Tana Rabbanan. That's where we're picking up. So Tana Rabbanan. The rabbis taught in a brisa. And of course, as I forecasted yesterday, we're going to deal with the question of what happens if the master's trying to help the slave and he ends up doing something wrong. So we're going to find out right now. And maybe not so surprisingly, it's a machlokas. So, Tanaraban, Haresh Shahaya Rabo Rofe, if you've got a slave whose owner is a doctor, but Amrlo. And so the slave, so as a result, there's some level of knowledge that we're going to impart to this doctor. But Amrlo Licholo Eno. And so the slave asks, listen, put some, this blue stuff on my eye, color my eye, it's not obvious on its face that this is talking about some kind of medication other than the fact that it says that he's a doctor, although you could understand it as just the doctor should know how to do so, and so as a result, when he fails to do so now what happens? Visim and in doing so the master ends up blinding the slave. So lachatorlo shino hipila, or he tells him, listen, I've got some tartar on my teeth, scrape it off. And so, again, we're talking about a master that's a doctor, so he should know how to do this effectively. And unfortunately, he doesn't do. He's not careful, and the master knocks it out. So So according to the Tanakama, in his opinion, in this brisa, the slave gets to laugh at the master, and he goes out for free, right? Because here the master was trying to help him, and the master ends up losing. So Ramashim ben Gamliel Omer v'shichasa. No, the point is that he has to. The act needs to be an act of destruction. Achi iskaven l'shachata. So until you have some kind of negative intention, that's not going to be a problem. So for Rabbanan, hi v'shichata my avdelay. So what the rabbis, the Tanakama, doesn't use that word for this purpose. So obviously the word exists in the Torah. So what in the world do they use it for? So look at the Tanya. We've got a brisa that highlights what the rabbis would use it for, because Rabbi Elazar Omer, Elazar says, Hare shahoshit yado limo shivchaso, that if the owner inserts his hand into the womb of a woman who's a slave, so v'simei ubar shibimeyaha, and he ends up blinding the fetus that's in her womb, patur, then he is exempt. My taima to amarkra v'shichata achi yechavin l'shachasa. So you hear there's no intention to destroy, and so as a result, that is where the rabbis use the shichata. So what's the difference between these two situations? So it seems like the difference is a double. Well, both have a positive intent, right? In both cases, you're intending to do well. What's the correct? But it didn't come out that way. Well, what's the difference between the case of putting the eye makeup on and the blinding the child while it's in utero? What's the case? What's the difference between the two?
While it's being delivered.
Yes, correct. While it's being delivered. So why? So what's the difference between that? Why, again, in the brisa, in the first brisa that we cited, the rabbis in the Tanakhama said, "Tough luck. You were trying to put on some makeup or put on some medicine, and you ended up blinding the guy. So I'm sorry, but that it's tough luck for you. You still have to let him free." But in the case where you're delivering the baby, you stick your hands in to pull the baby out, and in doing so, you accidentally blind the baby. So there you don't have to let the baby go free as a slave. So
Not the
so
baby, the
well,
woman.
the woman you wouldn't let go free because she doesn't have any harm happening to her. The question is the baby who's the slave, right? The baby's also going to be a slave because we're talking about the child of a female slave. So the point is you don't you in that situation you don't let the infant slave. Now you are offering one possible interpretation, but it doesn't seem like that's the basis. Meaning, you could say, well, what's going to happen to this infant? But the bottom line is so let's. But the difference that may be the fact that in the case of the brisa, when you're scraping the tooth or you're putting the makeup on the eye, you are intending to service that item. And so as a result, you may have not intended to do harm, but you intended to service that item. And so as a result, harm is a possible outcome. But when you're trying to deliver a baby, you're not trying to service the eye of the baby. It's you're trying to deliver the baby. And the fact that you accidentally got the eye of the baby is totally incidental. So we have two positive aspects in the case of the delivery, namely, you're trying to help and you are not intending to affect the eye in the first place. So you need to have both, according to the Tanakama, according to Rabbi Elazar.
You can't think of it in today's.
Yes, of course not. Exactly. You can't take right.
Make that comparison.
Correct. Well,
it doesn't exist.
Correct. They don't have the ability to do ultrasound and ultrasound, etc. It's not comparable at all. Well, we'll talk about it at the end, okay, Mark? But right now we're talking about the delivery of a baby. Delivery of a baby. Yeah, exactly.
An obstetrician, the GNY, carries $500,000.
Yes, correct. Exactly.
Cases like this.
Correct. So, okay, so let's now go through.
Well, hold on. The actual number is more like 200,000 in the Bronx, but yes, it is very high.
Okay.
And many of them
we'll have Rashi today.
Don't continue to practice because the malpractice insurance is prohibitive.
Exactly. So
I don't believe that there are any private practice obstetricians in the Bronx.
Yeah, well, that doesn't surprise me. So, all right, but the bottom line is that, and this, I guess, the point is that fact highlights the risk that's associated with it, and so as a result, it's not about again, the doctor is trying to help, and it's not focused on the eye, and so as a result, in that situation, the Tanakama, who says that when you put on the eye makeup, if God forbid you blind the slave, you still have to let him free. In the case of the delivery, because there's a positive intent and no intention to be even involved with the eye, we're not going to require the master to let the slave go free. The idach, what about Rabbi Shimon? How does he, determine the fact that in both of these cases, you don't allow the person to go free? Meaning, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel seems to be learning two things. He, of course, agrees with Rabbi Elazar, and he has his own statement that he says v'shichet applies in the other situation. Now, one could make an argument that maybe there's a kal v'chomer, but that's not what the Gemara does. Rather, it says mi v'shichet shichata nafka. No, the point is that he learns two things. It could have just said v'shichet. The fact that it says v'shichata, the fact that it adds the extra hay, that teaches us an additional law. The idach, what about the rabbis? What do they do with that extra hay? No, shichet shichata lo darish. That extra hay is not enough to create a basis to learn something additional. So that was the situation when it comes to helping. Okay. What was that?
Go walk later.
Okay, terrific. So all right, so now Tosos here, actually I should mark it here. Tosos here asks an interesting question, because if we take a look, third Tosos on Kav Daled Amabet, mi boile likiditanya, it says, Hashtamashma dekule alma dekishalon iskavin la'ayin putter. That when you have no intention to do anything that's harmful to the eye, then it would be potentially permitted. But we have a problem, because take a look at the following case. Vitema, we have a wonder. The Vipericates at Haregel in Baba Kama, Amar Rabba says, Haisa munechas lo evan becheko. If you have a stone on your chest, below hikirba, meolam, and you didn't even know about it, and you were sleeping, and now v'amad v'nafla, and then la'ayin eved, and now you get up, and it just so happens that you happen to get up in a way that the stone falls on the eye of the slave. And so pulga de Rabbi Shimon Gamaliel the Rabbanan. There's a machlokas between Rabbi Shimon and Gamaliel and the rabbis as to whether or not the slave goes free. So how come here it seems that everybody agrees in the case of the delivery, where there's clearly no intention to touch the eye, and over there, that the slave does not go free. But when it comes to that situation where there's also no intention to do anything related to the eye, there also we see there is a machlokas. So v'yesh lomer d'shayni hacha de'ikatarti. Here we have two bases. L'tivusa shehu miskaven l'tova. The point is that he intends to do good as well. V'lo niskaven la'ayin klal. And he isn't intending to involve the eye at all. Aval hahi dahasam havi dumya l'kacholo ayin. It's in that situation. It's similar to intending to put the eye makeup on or the eye medicine on v'sima, and you cause the blindness, because de'ikachada l'tivusa. There's only one benefit. There's only one thing over there by the eye makeup. It's talking about l'tivusa. But the sheniskaven l'rafot, v'chada l'riusa sheniskaven lion, and over here there's one intention of like the eye. And so what Tosfos has done is really highlighted the point that I made, which is that over by the delivery we've got two benefits: no intention for the eye and an intention to help. And so we need to have both of them to have a universal opinion that the slave does not go free. If you only have one, so for example, you have no intention for the eye, but you're not trying to help anyone, well, then in that case, if you fall asleep and somebody puts a stone on your chest, and now you get up and that stone falls into the eye of the slave, it is true that you had no intention to affect the eye at all, but it is not true that you were trying to help the slave. And so as a result, you don't have both benefits, and therefore it's going to be a machlokas. On the other hand, and then similarly, when it comes to trying to put the medicine on the eye, if you're trying to put the medicine on the eye, you're trying to benefit the slave. So therefore, that's one positive thing. But you don't have two positive things, because your intention is clearly to put medicine on the eye. You're affecting the eye. So as a result, that is not a benefit that you have. And so as a result, you would not, there would be a machlokas, as we have in the brisa that we quoted at the beginning of today. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to present a view on the issue of poking out an eye that is already blind. Is that considered subject to the Torah rule that a slave goes free for blinding him? Or do we say, no, the eye was already blind, so who cares? So Amar Rav Sheshes, Haresha Haisa Eino Samuya Bechitma Eved Yotze Behen Lecheres. So Rabbi Sheshes says that in that situation where the eye's already blind, if it gets knocked out, so then the Eved goes free. My taima Mechusar Everhu. Because if in fact you do, why does he go free? Because he is, as a result, missing an aver. He's missing an organ. So Vitana Kama, Vitana Tuna, and we have a Tana that taught this specific rule. Now, this specific rule was not taught in connection with slavery, but we're going to be seeing over the course of today a strong analogy between mumim, blemishes that cause a problem for a korban, and whether or not something constitutes a damage that will allow the slave to go free. And the reason for that analogy is because a mum needs to be something on the outside, something that's visible. And similarly, we saw that with respect to a slave, the damage needs to be on the outside. Vitana tuna. So what did the Tana say? Tamut, when it comes to completeness, the zachrut, and comes to masculinity, the vehema, the ain tamus v'zachrus ba'ofos. You need to have, when it comes to sacrifices that are voluntarily offered, where it says that we need to have a male animal and it needs to be complete. It can't have any mum. So that's with respect to animals, but not with respect to birds. When it comes to birds, you don't need that. Okay, so now, given that fact, Yachol, Yavsha Gapa, the Nikta Ragla, Nektita, Aina, I might have thought that even if a bird's wing was withered, or its leg was cut off, or its eye was removed, all of those would still result in a bird that's acceptable, because the bird doesn't have the same requirement of completeness. Tamalomar mina oath. It still says that the Torah says that you need to give a korban from the birds. From the birds implies that not every bird is going to be able to be offered. And so as a result, the lo kol ha'of, not every bird. And so as a result, there are going to be some situations where the loss of a limb is sufficiently bad that the bird is not offerable. And here, the eye being missing is one of those items. So we see as well, when it comes to the missing eye of a slave, that will be a sufficient situation that will allow the slave to go free. So Amarav Chia Bar Ashi Amarav Haisa Yiseres V'chasacha. What happens if you've got some kind of extra thing? What kind of extra thing as we turn to Kaf Hayamad Aleph? So we're going to do some Rashi here. You want to keep your finger in Rashi as well as in the Gemara so that we can follow along, because we're going to be doing a lot of Rashi right now. Yiseres Espa Yisera. We're talking about where you have an extra finger. An extra finger. Did you know that people could be born with an extra finger? And so, yes, there are some people that have 6 fingers. I still remember my biology textbook. That was one of my favorite pictures in the biology textbook, was a guy with 6 fingers on each hand. All right. And it's actually a dominant trait, Charlie will confirm. So that's very interesting. Anyway, the point is so now you've got this extra finger, and of course, and the master cuts it off. What happens? Is that going to be just like cutting off another finger, a regular finger, one of the 5 main fingers? Do we say that should leave the guy free? What? What's wrong? Nothing's wrong with 6 fingers. So just there's some people that have 6 fingers. We don't have 6 fingers. You and I don't have 6 fingers, but we have 5. Exactly. But what happens if a slave was born with 6 fingers and then one got cut off by the master? Does that slave goes free? If you knock off one of the regular fingers, the slave will go free. So what's the story here? So Aved Yotzes Behen Lecheres. So the opinion of Rav Chia in the name of Rav is that you do go free. So Rav Huna Vahushin is Peres al Gav Hayad. So, but it's got to be counted along with the hand. What does that mean? So Rashi helps us out again. Top line of Rashi: Shahisha b'shuras shar etzbaot. You would not. It's got to be along the line of all the fingers. Meaning, it can't just be some kind of minor appendage that, God forbid, is not where it's supposed to be, and now it gets cut off. That is not a finger. That is just a deformity that needs to be dealt with. So anyway, so that's the opinion number 1. And now we're going to tell a story. And this story is going to be an interesting story about people who didn't go to class and what happened to them. So Sove de Nizonia, we had the elders, the old people of Nizonia, the Lo Asul Pirke de Rav Chisda. They didn't come to Rav Chisda's lecture. Amar Leilu Rav Hamnuna. So they said to Rav Hamnuna, Rav Chisda said to Rav Hamnuna, listen, Zilt Sininu, go and hide them. So what does hide them mean? So let's take a look in Rashi, second line down, Ziltzinunu, Amar Aleim, go say to them, Lahasger, that they should hide themselves, and they should sit in their homes. This is a language of excommunication. L'talmid chacham, in order that you would use with somebody who is an intelligent person. Kida amar b'moed katan, as we saw in Moed Kotam, lomar lo derech kavod, that when you wanted to speak in an honorable manner to the one who's being excommunicated, you would say hasker v'shev b'veisecha. Close yourself off and sit in your house. So that's what Rav Chisda tells Rav Hamnuna that you should do to them. So Azal Amar Lahu. So in the process of doing that, so Rav Hamnuna went to find out what was going on. My time alo aso Rabbanan Lapirka. Why didn't you rabbis come to the class? So Amrulay. Say, why should we come? So we ask questions below Pashatlan, and he doesn't give us the details. He doesn't resolve it for us. So Amar Lahu, mi beiso minai mide, do you ask anything from me below Peshitna Lahu, and I didn't resolve it for you? So the Ben Yehoyada says that it must be that Rav Hamnuna here was the Maturgaman. He was the first person who would be the loudspeaker, right? So we would have rabbis, they would give over the class, but if you're teaching a class for a couple of hours, you can get exhausted. And so as a result, you have somebody sort of serve as your broadcaster. So Rav Hamnuna was Rav Chisda's broadcaster. So what he's saying is, listen, your communication with Rav Chisda is through me, and I don't remember ever not answering a question of yours. So boy, well, 1 second, we're going to ask you a question right now. So Evid Shaser so Rabo Bevetzim Mahu. What happens if, God forbid, a master cuts off the testicles of his slave? So kamum shebegali dami, is that and we'll say that it damages them internally. Let's start with that situation where he damages them internally. So do we say that it's considered an external blemish because the sack itself is outside and visible? Or do we say no? The damage to the testicles is internal to the body, and so even though you might be able to tell that it happened from the outside, it's considered internal. So lo havi biyade. So unfortunately, Rav Hamnuna didn't have the answer. Amrulo Mashem Shmach, what's your name? Meaning we're going to Rav Chisda's class. We're not going to your class. What's your name? So Amr Lahu Hamnuna. He said, my name's Hamnuna. So Amr Lay Lo Lav Hamnuna Ella Karnuna. Your name shouldn't be Hamnuna, it should be Karnuna. So why is that? So Rashi offers one explanation. Take a look in Rashi, second line down in the narrow lines at the end of the line. Karnuna, Yoshiv Kronosato. You should belong sitting in the corner. Below Baal Torah, you're not really a knowledgeable person of Torah. And then Tosos, and top Tosos on Kaf Hamid Aleph, says, it quotes Rashi, the Rabbeinu Chanano Perish, Ata Omer Hamnuna, Hainu Cham Nuna, meaning Dag, Cham Nuna Dag. So no, I'm sorry, Dag Cham, you're like a hot fish, meaning a Nuna is some kind of fish. So you're like and a Ham is like Cham, so you're hot. No, you're not hot stuff. The Ain Khan Ella Karnuna. Dag Shahu Kar. You're like a cold fish. So you're not some hot stuff, you're cold stuff. So also Kamei de Rav Chisda. So of course Rav Hamnuna goes back to Rav Chisda, tells him what happened. Amrlei Rav Chisda tells him, 1 second, Masnisa Bo Minach. They were really asking you about that a question that you can answer with the Baraisa. The Tanan, we've got the following. It's actually a Mishnah. We can actually answer with the Mishnah. The Mishnah is in Negaim. Esrim ba'arba rashi avarim b'sheva adam. There are 24 limbs. Kulam ein metamin mishum michya. But none of them, these 24 extremities, none of them are going to be subject to the tuma of michya. Michya, if we take a look at Rashi, ein metamin mishum michya. Shem echad min hanigaim. This is one of the kinds of blemishes, one of the kinds of tzarat that exists. Kediksiv, as it says in the Torah, Vayikra Yud Gimel, Umichya Basar Chai V'Seis, that you have this michya in the meat, in the flesh, that has like a living aspect to it in the blemish, in the nega, in the what is damaged on the skin. The ksivba, and we say in connection with that verse, l'chol mara einei hakohen, that it needs to all be seen by the kohen. Shetehei kula niris ka'achas, and it needs to all be seen at once. Well, what can we say about certain parts of the person's body? So lamichya shehi b'makom hamashuva v'yored l'kol tzad she'ein yachol liros rosh hanega v'raglis ka'achas. So that comes to exclude the situation where, if you look at it, you won't be able to see all of the extensions. And that is going to be true if you are dealing with an extremity, because you can't see all sides of a finger at the same time. You can't see all sides of each of the things that we're going to talk about. The Elohim, Rashi Etzbaos Yadayim V'Raglayim. So the tips of your fingers and your toes, that's 20. V'Rashi as Nayim, the edge of the ear, we're going to count that as 1. V'Rosh HaChotim, the tip of the nose, that's 1. V'Rosh HaGavia, the tip of the male organ, that's 1. V'Rashi Dadim should be Isha, and the breasts of a woman, the tips of the breasts. So Rabbi Yehuda Omer should be Ish. Also, for a man, you won't necessarily be able to see it because it's not necessarily an area that can be flat. The Tani Allah, and we learned in connection with this Mishnah, we learned the following brisa: B'chulam eved yotze behen lecheres. All of these, 24 situations, a slave will go free as a result. Rabbi Yehuda Omer af haseris, and Rebbe says, Rebbe Omer af haseris, even an emasculation will also cause it to go free. So Ben Azai Omer af halashon, and similarly the tongue is also another area that where the slave will go free if it gets cut off. So Amar Mar, Rebbe Omer af haseris. So we say, Rebbe says it's talking about emasculation. So seris demai, what are we talking about? Do we say ilema seris de gid? If you want to tell me that we're talking about the cutting of the male organ, well, that can't be, because hainu gevia, we referenced it above. We said the rosh hagevia, which was referring to the male organ. So elalav seris debates him. So it must be the testicles. And so as a result, we've shown that Rebbe says that the testicles are a problem, but the other opinion, Ben Azai would say that they're not. So the answer to the question that was posed to Rav Hamnuna is that it's a machlokes. Okay, so Rebbe Omer af haseris. Well, 1 second. You're telling me that Rebbe says that it's only when it comes to the loss of the testicles, but Rebbe lashon lo. But when it comes to a tongue, Rebbe would say no, because he's disagreeing with Ben Azai. Uraminu, but I've got a couple of efforts, and now we're going to try a couple of different times to show that Rebbe really should be saying even the tongue. And we'll finally, in the end, conclude that, in fact, Rebbe does agree with Ben Azai that the tongue is a problem. So Uraminu, let's take a look at the first effort. Hare Misha Hayamazeh. That when it comes to, this is a brisa that talks about the sprinkling of the para aduma water on somebody in order to make them tahor. Now, all of these efforts at proofs are all about fundamentally one thing: is the tongue considered an external bodily organ, bodily piece, or is it considered internal? It's a good question, right? Because if you open your mouth, it's external. If you close your mouth, it's internal. So in each situation, we're going to see whether Rebbe says that it's external or internal. So how about the sprinkling of the paraduma? Now, it should be noted that for that sprinkling to be effective, it has to be on the outside of a person. So what happens if it happens to be that the sprinkling only went on the person's tongue? Is that considered outside? or inside. So vinitza haza al piv, if you sprinkle on the person's mouth, Rebbe Omer, it's a valid sprinkling. The Chachamim say no. So my lav alashono must be that we're talking about the tongue. That's what we're talking about when we refer to the mouth. So lo, no, you could say it's not talking about the tongue. You could say al svasav, it's talking about the lips. 1 second, al svasav, pshita. It should be obvious that the lips are considered to be part of the outer part of the body. And what in the world are the rabbis doing arguing with it? So no, ma'udatema zimna dechalam sifsei kamash malan, not so. So no, sometimes your lips are pursed, right? You pucker your lips, or you put them internal to like that, and then all of a sudden now they're internal. So I might have thought that means that they would not be that if the paraduma water lands on them, that's not sufficient. So Rebbe says that it is, and the rabbis would disagree. Now, in the end, we're going to reinterpret this as we expect, that it's really talking about the tongue, and we'll see that in a moment. But Hatanya, well, 1 second, there's still a problem, because we've got another brisa where it says al lishono, where it specifically says that the water was on the tongue, and we still had that same machlokus, and Rebbe said that it was okay. V'od Tanya, and moreover, vishanito rov halashon. And when it comes to a bechor sacrifice and whether or not it's fit, we say that the Tanakama says that it's got to be the most of the tongue needs to be missing, and if most of the tongue is missing, it's going to be a problem. And Rebbe Omer, no, rov hamendaber shabilshono. It's got to be most of the tongue after it becomes disconnected. Well, actually, that's what I'm telling you. What Rashi says. The literal language is rov hamendaber shabilshono. Most of the speaking of the tongue. Meaning, what does that mean? Rov hamendaber. If we take a look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines up in the Rashi narrow lines. Mimokom prishas dibuko, from the point where it separates from the rest of the body. Vilamala, and outward from there. That is kari medaber. That is called the medaber part of the tongue. And unlike the Tanakama, who says that in order to measure a majority of the tongue, you need to measure even the part of the tongue that's connected. Here, Rebbe is saying that you just focus on the part of the tongue that's disconnected. Well, bottom line is for that to be considered a mum, it needs to be considered outside of the party, outside of the body. Meaning it can't be internal. And now Rashi answers the very important question: why are we calling the tongue of an animal the majority of the speaking part? The afal gav the dibur behema lo shaycha, even though speaking doesn't apply to an animal, karile medaber, we call that part of the tongue the medaber. That when it comes to a human tongue, that's the part that enables speech, and so that's why we're going to call it that. Okay. Ella, so again, it seems like the tongue should be considered outside the body. So Ella, Rabbi Amar, Seris Velomi Bailashim. So really, now we're changing our approach. Rebbe agrees with Ben Azai that a slave goes free for removal of a tongue. Okay, and he's saying lomi bai lashon, not only the other thing, but also, and it also would apply to the tongue. Okay, so Ben Azai omer lashon aval seris lo, and Ben Azai would disagree. He would say no, only the tongue, not the testicles. So umay af. 1 second, but if we take a look back at Ben Azai's statement, he said af seris. So that doesn't make any sense, because the previous statement was on the tongue. So it would seem like Ben Azai was saying both the tongue and emasculation would be a problem. No, so a kamaisa, he would say only on the first point, meaning his comment was on the first 24 items that were mentioned in the Mishnah in Negayim. So ihachi naktama to Ben Azai beresha, move Ben Azai ahead of Rebbe. It would be much clearer if we first put Ben Azai's teaching of adding just the tongue, and then we put Rebbe's teaching of adding the tongue and the testicles. So Tanashma the Rabbi. No, the issue is that the person who taught that brisa heard Rebbe's comment first, ukva'a, and he established it as the first statement, ushma'al ben Azai, and then he heard Ben Azai, utani umishna lo zaza mimikoma, and he didn't want to change the ordering of its teachings from its original place. So that is the story. That is the situation, and the bottom line is that is now we have, even though we got to this context through the discussion of saris, of emasculation, we're now going to talk about the tongue. And indeed, we're going to now provide the background for the debate that we saw about whether sprinkling the red heifer ashes, the para aduma water, whether sprinkling on the tongue is sufficient. So where was that discussion? So Ula is going to provide us the framework for it. Hakol modim bilashon, everybody agrees when it comes to the tongue. Le'inyan tuma, when it comes to a person becoming tamei, de gully who eitzel hasheret. That when it comes to a creepy crawly thing, this is really kind of disgusting. So if you get disgusted by this, you may want to close your ears for a moment. That if in fact you the public warning, if in fact the bug, the sherets, or the creepy crawly thing touches a person's tongue, then they become tamei, even though it might not be considered, you might otherwise not consider it an external part of the body. Le'inyan tuma, if we take a look in Rashi, 6 lines down, in the widest lines at the bottom of Rashi, the kaimalan maga besa starim eno mitame. That in general we say that if something touches an internal organ, it's not considered to make somebody tame. V'nafgalan Maseches Nida, and we learn it out in Maseches Nida, Daf Mem Gimel Amanav, Mivakol Asher Yigabo Hazav, that when it comes to anything that the Zab touches, and the rest of that pasuk references that as long as the Yadav Lo Shata, and his hands were not washed, B'mayim. Now, Hashatav Tahor, Bitmiya, 1 second. If a person just washes his hands, is that enough to cause him to become tahor? Of course not. He has to go to the mikvah. Now, today, we wash our hands before we eat bread in an aspect of trying to remember the fact that we need to keep our hands clean and keep our body tahor in connection with eating, and that's because we try to remember the sacrificial obligations that were associated with eating. But that's not really a tahor process. That was just what the rabbis established. So hatvilabai, as we continue in the Rashi, he really needs to have tvila. So why does it therefore reference the yadav lo shatav, that his hands weren't washed? Ela kol asher yiga bo hazav b'davar shehu galei ki yadav. It's referencing the hands to tell us that that in order for somebody to become tamei, they need to be touched on a piece of their body that is like their hands, namely it's exposed. V'hazav lo shatav adayin, where the zav was not yet washed. And what does it mean to have not been washed? Kol gufo is referring to his entire body, b'mayim, in the water. Shalo tavo mizovo b'kavas b'gadav, that he didn't basically immerse himself and wash his clothing. And so as a result, when the pasuk says the yadav lo shatav, it's the yadav kama, that's what you need to touch, lo shatav b'mayim, that he didn't actually go into the water completely. So that's the drasha that we have, that Rashi teaches us and tells us is taught over in Nida, and as a result, that is the story with respect to why you might think that the tongue is considered internal. So my taima, why is the tongue considered external, that you would become tamei? Back in the Gemara, and so we are. It's the abbreviation at the end of the 13th line up in the Gemara. So my taima asher yigaba amar rachmana yigaba amar rachmana. The Torah says that it's anything he touches. V'hainami bar negiyahu. tongues are something that can be touched. So, so 1 second. And so that's point number one of Ula. Now, point number two of Ula is, what about when it comes to immersion? Does the tongue need to be immersed in the mikvah? Meaning, do we need to open our mouths when we go in the mikvah? So thankfully, no. When it comes to being immersed in the mikvah, it's considered internal, it's hidden. My taima, again, the same question. Why? Because the Torah says you need amarachmana. The Torah says that you need to have washed the flesh in water. So my bisaro me'abrai, just like the flesh is outside, av kol me'abrai, everything has to be outside, and the tongue is inside. So lo nechlaku ela inyan hazah. The disagreement between Rebbe and the rabbis is all about the sprinkling. Rabbi medame la latuma. Rebbe compares the tongue and sprinkling to tuma, and Rabbana medame la tefillah. And the rabbis say, no, it's more like tefillah. The tarvayu b'haikra and kamiflagi. And they're both arguing about the interpretation of the same verse, because the verse says, V'hizah tahor al hatameh, that they're going to sprinkle the tar on the tameh. By Yom Hashlishi v'Yom Hashvi, on the third and the seventh days. V'chito b'Yom Hashvi'i, and you'll sprinkle him on the seventh day. V'chibes b'gadav, and he'll wash his clothes. V'rachatz b'mayim, and he'll wash in the water, meaning engage in tefillah. V'taher ba'arv, and then he'll become tahor at night. So that's the full verse. And now we're going to see in the middle of that verse, it says v'chito b'yom hashvi'i, that he sprinkles him on the seventh day. That reference to sprinkling, that the question is, what is it going on? Do we connect it back to hatameh, the word tameh at the beginning of the verse, or do we connect it forward to v'rachatz b'mayim at the end of the verse? So let's take a look. Rebbe savar b'hizah tor al hatamei b'yom hashlishi v'yom hashvi'i v'chito, that when it comes to tamei and then the word chito, to purify, so those aspects together, that is telling us that that we treat the purification of the tongue like tuma, meaning it's considered external. That no, connect the v'chito, the sprinkling that's purifying the tongue, connect that to rachatz b'mayim, which is immersing in the water, in the mikvah. And just like in the mikvah, the tongue is considered internal, so too for the sprinkling, it should be considered internal. For Rabbanan Nami, well, 1 second. Why don't the rabbis agree Nidamya latuma, that they should compare it to tuma just like Rabbi did? Well, tahara mitahara havalei. They would prefer to go to the end of the verse because sprinkling and immersion both involve the process of becoming tahor. And if both involve the process of becoming tahor, well, then in that case, we should say that that we should connect those two ideas. Well, 1 second, that actually sounds like a very good argument for Rebbe. Nidamya l'tvila, why not compare it to immersion, just like the rabbis did, because it makes a lot more sense to compare two methods of purification. Well, the problem is that from their perspective, from Rebbe's perspective, it interrupts the story, because we have an interruption between the sprinkling and the immersion, because it also talks about washing the clothing, and that changes the topic. The Sava Rebbe l'inyan tvila b'taman dami, and when it comes to, and second, now does Rebbe really hold that when it comes to the tongue, it's like that the tongue is considered hidden when it comes to tvila, and not with respect, and not outside? V'hama Rav and Amar Rav Ada Amar Rebbe, Amar Rebbe Yitzchak. We have a story of Rav Ada that was said in the name of Rav Ada, in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak. Masa b'shivcha shel beis Rebbe. There was a slave woman in the house of Rebbe. Now, slave women needed to go to the mikvah if they were being married off. So, because they had the commandments that were not Zman Grama, Shetabla Va'alsa, and she immersed herself. But then Venimsa Etzem Ben Shineha, and then she found a bone between her teeth. There was something in her mouth. V'etzricha Rebbe Tvila Acheres, and Rebbe said she needed another immersion. Doesn't that show that it must be that she must have had to open her mouth and it didn't get all into her mouth because of the chatzitza? No, it does not, in fact, mean that, because nehi devias mayim lo be'inan makom haroy levobo mayim be'inan. It's a simple situation. Although you do not need to open your mouth when you are in the mikvah, you do need your mouth to be in a state such that if you did open your mouth, the water would get everywhere it needed to get. But you do not need to actually open it. Kidder Rebbe Zera. And we have this statement of Rebbe Zera throughout Shas, because it's not really about this story. It's about the mincha offering, and it's about whether or not you need to mix the oil and the flour in the mincha offering. And what Rebbe Zera says is the Amar Rebbe Zera kol haroy levila ein bila ma kevesbo. As long as the amount of flour and oil that you have is an amount that could be mixed, you're good. It's only the problem is if but if it doesn't have, if you have too much oil and flour, so it's too much to be mixed in a single mixing, well, then then the mixing is going to be necessary, meaning that it's not going to be a valid mincha offering. And the same thing can be said with respect to our situation. We're going to say that if you don't, even though you don't have to open your mouth, if in fact there was something in your mouth that would have constituted a chatzitza if you had opened your mouth, we're going to consider that a problem. And it will be a situation where you would have needed to open your mouth, meaning that it's not a valid tevilah. All right, so now that we've dealt with all of that, we are going to now return to the constant question of the cutting of testicles. So kitanai. So we have the whole issue of the cutting of testicles is actually a machlokas tanaim, because we have a brisa that speaks when it comes to the blemishes of a sacrificial animal. Umauch v'kasus v'nasuk v'karus. This is the Torah saying that squash, crushed, torn, or severed. Kulam b'beitzim. So the Tanakama, the Rabbi Yehuda says all of these apply to testicles. So Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, that's what Rabbi Yehuda says. But Beitzim v'lo begid, are you telling me that all of these are only a problem when it comes to the testicles, but not with respect to the male organ? No, Ella, really, what Rabbi Yehuda's statement should be, Kulan Kulan af b'beitzim. All of them are a problem, even with respect to testicles, and of course they're a problem with respect to the male organ as well. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Omer, no, kulam begid. All of them are a problem with respect to the male organ. Rabbi Yossi Omer, no. Rabbi Yossi compromises and says ma'uch v'kasus af b'beitzim nasuk v'charos begid in b'beitzim lo. So two of them apply to testicles, but the other two, torn and severed, they would only apply to the male organ. So, but the bottom line is that the machlokas that we saw earlier is also in existence, is also a machlokas among Tanaim with respect to whether or not that is considered a mum, and therefore, if it would be considered a mum, then it would also constitute something that would cause a slave to go free. All right, so that finishes our discussion of slaves. And we've dealt now with acquisitions of wives, with Jewish slaves, non-Jewish slaves, and now we turn to animals. Behema gasa niknas b'masira, a large animal is acquired by giving it over. And Rashi says b'masira baleha mosrin otal lokeach. The owner hands over something to the buyer. What does he hand? Ba'afsar, either the bit, obishara, obisara, or its hair. So basically, you give over the way of grabbing the animal to the new owner. How do we accomplish Masira? Aval Mashicha, the implication right now is that Mashicha, dragging the animal to you, lo makanya, that doesn't create a kinyan. De'ein darcha b'kach laholicha lefanav, because we don't. These are not animals that are dragged along with the person in front of them. Okay, and the small animals are acquired by lifting them. Divri Rabbi Meir Rabbi Eliezer. That's what Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Eliezer say. The Chachamim say no. A small animal can be acquired by dragging it and pulling it towards you. Darash Chunya. Rav had a taught in Kimchunya. No, a large animal can also be acquired through bringing it close. But that now note that differs from our Mishnah, where the Chachamim said only a small animal could. Ashkachinu Shmuel Talmidei to Rav. So Shmuel happened to meet the students of Rav. Amarlahu, me Amar Rav, Behema Gasa Nikdas B'Mashika. Did Rav really say that? B'Ha'anan B'Masira Tanan. We learned in our Mishnah that it requires Masira. And even the Chachamim seem to agree with that. The Rav Nami b'Masira Amar, and Rav himself had taught that it was Masira. Hadar b'Mehahi, did he go back from that? So who the Amar ki Tana? So they answered him, no. Rav said like the following Tana did Tanya the Chachamim Omrim zu v'zu nikras b'Mashika, that really every kind of animal, small and large, can be acquired with drawing them near, with pulling them towards you. Rabbi Shimon Omer zu v'zu b'Hagba, and Rabbi Shimon says no, that you need actual lifting. Well, 1 second, Maskif la Rav Yosef Elamiata Pil la Rabbi Shimon b'Meh Yikna. If you actually need lifting, how do you acquire an elephant? A good question, right? And pretty heavy. So Amar le Abaye b'chalifin. No, Rabbi says, nah, you just use a chalifin. You do an exchange. You use one of the other mechanisms of acquisition. Inami b'socher es mekoma. Or you could rent the place underneath where the elephant is, and then the land itself could acquire the elephant for you. Rabbi Zera Amar, maybe arba kalim manichin tachas rag. No, put four different kind of vessels underneath the feet of the elephant, and you'll acquire it presumably through the acquisition of your kalim performing the acquisition. But 1 second, that raises the question of a machlokas that we saw elsewhere, and we have seen that we don't want to have a proof one way or the other on this. Well, Shimas Mina, Caleb Lokeach, or Shus Moker Kana Lokeach. Well, 1 second, are you telling me that if I have my elephant in my possession and I'm selling it to Stan, that Stan can bring in 4 different kalim from his own property and put them in my property and use his kalim in my property to make an acquisition? We know that is a classic machlokas. It's a machlokas that we will see in Baba Basra, and so that's a real problem if you're going to tell me that in fact it's going to work. So no, we're talking about besimta. We're talking about, as Rashi says, a simta zavis. It's like a corner. Shehi eitzel rishus harabim. It's near the rishus harabim. The aina lo rishus harabim, lo rishus hayakid. It's not public domain and it's not private domain. And so as a result, in that specific place, your vessels could make an acquisition for you. Inami, alternatively, no, we're not talking about. You're missing the point completely. When we talked about the kalim being put underneath the feet, we're talking about the concept of bechavile zmoros. It could even be bundles of vines, meaning it doesn't have to be literal kalim where my kalim are making an acquisition. But the idea is, as Rashi says, Rashi end of the top line on Kav Vav Amud Aleph, hagavohim min ha'aretz shlosha tfachim. We're talking about putting something down that's 3 tfachim tall from the ground. Umolichan aleihem, and then the animal goes on them. The hagbas shlosha tfachim, hagbahi, because you're effectively causing the animal to be lifted up by 3 tvachim. And 3 tvachim is important because the nafka leim in Torah's levud, because that takes it out of the concept of levud. We have a concept that if in fact something is within 3 amos of the ground, it's really like the ground is all flat. But once you get to above 3 tvachim, then all of a sudden now it's considered separate and it's considered a lifting. And so now we've learned the important lesson of how one acquires an elephant. Now, having discussed animals, we're ready to discuss real and movable property in the next Mishnah. But for that, stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Have a wonderful, wonderful day and look forward to continuing our learning together.
I have a question.
Hold on for a second. We have a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it seems like they're treating an elephant as a behema rather than a chaya. Elephants are not domestic animals.
Well, it's an excellent question. I don't know the answer for sure, but
They've never been bred in captivity except recently in zoos. They were
but
captured and tamed, which is very different.
but the question is I'm not sure. I believe that you can still acquire even a wild animal. Meaning, if I trap a wild animal in a trap, I have successfully taken possession of that wild animal. And so, even though it is not domesticated, the rules of acquisition would still apply to it. And so, as a result, that's why we still need to have a mechanism to convey an elephant.
Yeah, so the Behemoth Chaya distinction isn't really about domesticated versus
Well, it is that distinction when it comes to the question of covering blood and how we
right,
treat.
that's what I mean. If I have a deer so example, deer actually are raised in farms at some point for venison. And when I checked it, the covering the blood would be as a chaya rather than a behemoth.
Correct. That's correct. So it's not about how we're treating it right now. It's sort of how we view the animal more generally, and it's more about the distinctions. The distinction is more of when it comes to chaya versus behema. It's more about how we think of it, maybe with respect to Shabbos, maybe with respect to shchita. There are a variety of different areas, but when it comes to the acquisition, it doesn't seem like that. Note that the Mishnah itself used the term gasa and daka, not chaya and behema.
Right,
So I think that here, when it used the word behema, I don't think it was saying behema as opposed to chaya. I think it was just talking about animals.
Yeah,
Generally.
I was wondering about the word behemoth because they didn't use the word chaya at all in this.
Correct.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks. Yasher
Have a
Tov.
great day. Be well. Thanks for the question.
Bye-bye.